Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blackthorn Manor. Hercule Poirot adjusted his perfectly knotted tie and smoothed his meticulously groomed moustache as the train rattled through the misty English countryside. The autumn of 1928 had draped the landscape in a sombre palette of golds and greys, and Poirot, seated in the first-class carriage, contemplated the peculiar letter that had summoned him from his cosy London flat. The envelope, embossed with a crest of a thorn-wrapped raven, bore the elegant script of Lady Evelyn Blackthorn, a name unfamiliar to him until this morning. Her invitation to spend a weekend at Blackthorn Manor was both courteous and cryptic, hinting at a matter of utmost urgency without disclosing its nature. Poirot, never one to resist a puzzle, had accepted, his curiosity piqued by the letter's undertone of unease. The train slowed as it approached the rural station of Thornbridge, a speck of civilization amidst rolling hills. Poirot disembarked, his polished shoes clicking on the platform, and was met by a dour-faced driver in a black overcoat. "Monsieur Poirot, for Blackthorn Manor?" the man asked, his voice as grey as the sky. Poirot nodded, and soon the car wound through narrow lanes, the manor emerging like a spectre through the fog. Its Gothic spires loomed over gnarled oaks, and its stone facade, weathered by centuries, seemed to guard secrets within its walls. Upon entering the grand hall, Poirot's eyes were drawn to the centerpiece of the manor, a sweeping oak staircase, its polished banister gleaming under a chandelier's dim glow. The stairs ascended to a shadowed landing, and Poirot noted the 17th step slightly worn, as if countless feet had hesitated there. A local legend, mentioned in passing by the driver, whispered of a curse tied to that step, a tale of misfortune that Poirot dismissed as superstition, though he filed it away in his orderly mind. Lady Evelyn Blackthorn greeted him with the poise of aristocracy, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her eyes sharp despite her advanced years. "Monsieur Poirot, your presence honors us," she said, her voice betraying a faint tremor. She introduced the other guests, a curious assembly that seemed ill at ease in one another's company. Colonel Reginald Hawes, a retired military man with a bristling moustache and a penchant for brandy, eyed Poirot with suspicion. Vivienne Leroux, a glamorous actress whose star had faded but whose charm had not, flashed a dazzling smile that Poirot suspected masked calculation. Dr. Mortimer Crane, a wiry historian with ink-stained fingers, clutched a notebook as if it held state secrets. Mr. Tobin, the manor's groundskeeper, lingered at the edges, his weathered face unreadable. Lastly, Miss Clara Henshaw, Lady Blackthorn's young companion, flitted nervously, her eyes darting to the staircase. Dinner was a formal affair in the dining room, where candlelight cast flickering shadows on portraits of stern Blackthorn ancestors. The conversation was stilted, punctuated by the clink of silverware and the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows. Poirot observed the guests' interactions with his customary precision. Colonel Hawes spoke loudly of his wartime exploits, though his anecdotes seemed rehearsed. Vivienne Leroux deflected questions about her recent absence from the London stage, her laughter a touch too bright. Dr. Crane, engrossed in a discussion about the manor's history, mentioned a 19th-century tragedy, a young Blackthorn heiress who fell to her death on the staircase, precisely on the 17th step. "Mere folklore," he said, but his eyes lingered on the doorway leading to the hall. Lady Blackthorn, seated at the head of the table, steered the conversation to neutral topics, yet Poirot noted her unease. She spoke of the manor's restoration, funded by her late husband's fortune, but her fingers twisted a lace handkerchief. "The staircase," she said abruptly, "has always been particular. One must tread carefully." Her words hung in the air, and Poirot's little grey cells stirred. Why had she invited him, a detective, to this gathering? Was it merely social, or did she suspect a threat among her guests? As the meal concluded, Poirot excused himself to explore the manor's lower floor, his cane tapping softly on the parquet. The grand staircase drew his attention again, its 17th step slightly darker, as if stained by time or something else. He ascended slowly, counting each step, and paused on the 17th. The wood creaked faintly, and a chill draught brushed his cheek, though no window was open. Poirot's mind, ever analytical, dismissed the notion of curses, but noted the step's prominence in the manor's lore. A psychological ploy, perhaps, or a clue to a more tangible danger. Returning to the drawing-room, Poirot found the guests in a state of forced civility. Colonel Hawes argued with Dr. Crane over a historical detail, while Vivienne Larue whispered to Miss Henshaw, who blushed and looked away. Tobin, summoned to stoke the fire, moved with the quiet efficiency of a man accustomed to being overlooked. Poirot's keen eyes caught a glance, exchanged between Lady Blackthorne and the groundskeeper, a fleeting moment of understanding that vanished as quickly as it appeared. As the evening drew to a close, Lady Blackthorne proposed a toast. "To new friends and safe nights," she said, her voice steady but her eyes searching the room. Poirot raised his glass, his mind racing. The invitation, the staircase, the guests' guarded demeanors, all were pieces of a puzzle he had yet to assemble. He retired to his room, a spacious chamber overlooking the fog-shrouded gardens, and sat at a small desk to jot notes in his precise handwriting. The names of the guests, their mannerisms, and the curious legend of the 17th Step filled the page. As he prepared for bed, Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound, a creak, as if someone had stepped on the staircase. He opened his door, peering into the darkened hall, but saw only shadows. The manor was silent, yet the air felt heavy with anticipation. Poirot closed his door, his mind alight with possibilities. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "The little grey cells, they have much work to do." The night deepened, and Blackthorn Manor seemed to hold its breath, the 17th Step a silent sentinel in the heart of the house. Poirot, ever vigilant, knew that the weekend would bring more than polite conversation. A mystery was afoot, and he, Hercule Poirot, would unravel it, step by careful step. Chapter 2. The Scream in the Night. The clock in Hercule Poirot's room struck midnight, its chime a soft echo in the stillness of Blackthorn Manor. Poirot, still awake, sat in an armchair by the window, his notebook open on his lap. The fog outside pressed against the glass, obscuring the gardens below, and the manor seemed to hum with an unsettling quiet. He had been mulling over the evening's observations, the guarded glances, the half-spoken truths, the peculiar emphasis Lady Blackthorne placed on the 17th Step. His little grey cells were restless, sensing a pattern yet to emerge. A piercing scream shattered the silence, slicing through the manor like a blade. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his cane in hand, his senses sharpened. The sound had come from the direction of the grand staircase. He opened his door and stepped into the darkened corridor where flickering gas lamps cast long shadows. The other guest doors began to open, their faces pale and alarmed. Colonel Reginald Hawes, clad in a burgundy dressing-gown, clutched a candlestick as if it were a weapon. Vivienne Larue, her silk robe hastily tied, emerged with wide eyes, her theatrical composure fraying. Dr. Mortimer Crane, spectacles askew, clutched his ever-present notebook, while Miss Clara Henshaw hovered behind Lady Blackthorne, who stood at the corridor's end, her face ashen. "Monsieur Poirot." "What was that?" Lady Blackthorne asked, her voice steady but her hands trembling. "A scream, madame, and one of great distress," Poirot replied, his tone calm but authoritative. "We must investigate at once." The group descended the staircase, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall. Poirot led the way, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The 17th Step loomed in his mind, its legend now more ominous. As they reached the grand staircase, a figure stumbled from the shadows near the base, a young maid, Annie, her face tear-streaked and her apron askew. "Oh, sir," she gasped, clutching Poirot's arm. "I saw it, a shadow there, on the 17th Step. It moved, like it was alive." Poirot's moustache twitched as he gently steadied the girl. "Calm yourself, Mademoiselle Annie. Tell Poirot exactly what you saw." Annie, trembling, recounted her tale. She had been tending to the fire in the drawing-room when she heard a creak from the staircase. Thinking it was a guest, she approached, only to see a dark, indistinct figure standing on the 17th Step. "It wasn't human, sir," she whispered. "It vanished when I screamed." The other servants, gathered now, murmured about the staircase's curse, their fear palpable. Poirot knelt by the 17th step, his keen eyes examining it under the dim chandelier light. The wood was polished, but a faint scuff mark, barely visible, marred its surface. He pressed his fingers to it, noting its texture, but found no other clues. Rising, he addressed the group. "There is no body, no blood, no sign of harm. Yet a scream does not come from nothing. Where were each of you when it sounded?" Colonel Hawes bristled. "In my room, of course, woken by that infernal noise." His gruff tone suggested irritation, but Poirot noted his grip on the candlestick tightened. Vivienne Larue, her voice husky, claimed she was preparing for bed, though her smudged makeup suggested otherwise. Dr. Crane stammered that he was reviewing notes in his room, his fingers twitching nervously. Miss Henshaw, clinging to Lady Blackthorne, said she was asleep until the scream woke her. Lady Blackthorne herself admitted to being in her study, writing letters. Mr. Torbin, summoned from the servants' quarters, said he was in the stables, checking on the horses. Poirot's sipped eyes narrowed. "And none of you ventured near the staircase." A chorus of denials followed, but Poirot Sip's mind catalogued their hesitations. Someone was lying, or at the very least withholding the truth. He turned to Annie. "Mademoiselle, show me precisely where you stood when you saw this apparition." Annie led him to the drawing-room's entrance, a few paces from the staircase. From this angle, the 17th step was clearly visible, bathed in the chandelier's faint glow. Poirot paced the area, noting the sightlines. A shadow could be cast by someone standing above, perhaps on the landing, but the maid's terror seemed genuine. Was it a trick of light, or something more sinister? Lady Blackthorne, regaining her composure, invited the guests to the drawing-room for brandy to calm their nerves. Poirot declined, preferring to remain alert. As the group settled, he observed their interactions. Colonel Hawes muttered about hysterical maids, while Vivienne Larue sipped her brandy with calculated poise, her eyes darting to the door. Dr. Crane scribbled furiously in his notebook, pausing only to glance at the staircase. Miss Henshaw, pale and silent, seemed to shrink into her chair, while Lady Blackthorne's gaze lingered on the portrait of her late husband, Sir Edmund Blackthorne, whose death, Poirot recalled, was vaguely tied to the manor's tragic history. Poirot approached the staircase again, this time ascending to the landing. The 17th step creaked under his weight, a sound distinct from the others. He examined the banister, the walls, the nearby portraits, but found nothing out of place. Yet the maid's story gnawed at him, a shadow that moved, a figure that vanished. His logical mind rejected the supernatural, but he knew the human capacity for deception was boundless. Returning to the drawing-room, Poirot addressed the group. "Mes amis, this incident is no mere fancy. Someone, or something, caused Mademoiselle Annie to scream. As Hercule Poirot will discover the truth. But I urge you, be vigilant. The night is not yet over." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, and Poirot noted their reactions. Colonel Hawes's scowl deepened, Vivienne's smile tightened, and Dr. Crane's pen paused mid-stroke. Lady Blackthorne offered to have the servants search the manor, but Poirot declined. "Non, madame. The clues are here in this room, in your faces. Poirot will find them." As the guests retired, Poirot lingered, his eyes fixed on the staircase. He recalled Dr. Crane's mention of the 19th-century heiress who fell on the 17th step. Her death ruled an accident, but whispered to be murder. Was the maid's vision a deliberate echo of that tragedy, staged to frighten or distract, or was it a warning of something yet to come? In his room, Poirot added to his notebook, "Scream at midnight. Shadow on 17th step. Alibis inconsistent. Motive unclear." He closed the book, his mind alight with possibilities. The manor was a chessboard, and the players were in motion. Tomorrow he would begin to separate truth from deception, starting with the 17th step. Chapter 3. The Historian Sept's Secret. The morning after the scream at Blackthorne Manor dawned grey and heavy, with mist clinging to the windows like a shroud. Hercule Poirot, ever punctual, descended the grand staircase at precisely 8 o'clock, pausing briefly on the 17th step. The faint scuff mark he had noted the previous night was still there, barely discernible in the daylight filtering through the hall's tall windows. He tapped his cane thoughtfully, his little grey cells humming with questions. The maid's tale of a shadow, the guest's evasive alibis, and Lady Blackthorn's cryptic invitation formed a puzzle that demanded his attention. Today he resolved to focus on Dr. Mortimer Crane, the historian whose obsession with the Manor's past seemed more than academic. Breakfast was served in the dining room, where the guests gathered in uneasy silence. Colonel Reginald Hawes grumbled about the damp weather, his fork stabbing at his eggs with military precision. Vivienne Larue, her makeup impeccable despite the early hour, sipped coffee and avoided eye contact. Miss Clara Henshaw, pale and fidgety, kept her gaze on her plate while Lady Blackthorn presided with strained civility. Dr. Crane, seated at the table's far end, scribbled in his notebook, his breakfast untouched. Poirot, seated opposite, observed the man's nervous energy, the way his pen darted across the page, the occasional glance toward the staircase. "Monsieur Crane," Poirot began, his voice smooth as he buttered a croissant, "you spoke last night of a tragedy on the 17th step, a young heiress, non? Tell Poirot more of this history. It intrigues him." Crane's pen froze, and his spectacles slipped down his nose. "Oh, it's merely a footnote in the Manor's records," he said, adjusting his glasses. "In 1847, Miss Eleanor Blackthorn fell to her death on the staircase. The family claimed it was an accident. She was known to be frail, but local gossip suggested foul play. No evidence was ever found." Poirot's moustache twitched, and this fall it occurred precisely on the 17th step. Crane nodded, his eyes flickering to the doorway. "So the records say the step has been considered unlucky ever since." "Unlucky," Poirot repeated, his tone neutral, but his mind alert. "And you, a scholar, you seek to document this misfortune." Crane Sept's smile was thin. "I study the Manor Sept's history, Monsieur Poirot. The Blackthorns are a fascinating family, with many secrets buried in their archives." Poirot noted the word secrets and filed it away. After breakfast, he requested Lady Blackthorn's permission to visit the Manor's library where Crane had spent much of his time. She agreed, her expression unreadable, and Poirot followed Crane to a cavernous room lined with leather-bound volumes and dusty manuscripts. The air smelled of old paper and wax, and a single window admitted a sliver of grey light. Crane resumed his work at a large oak table, surrounded by open books and scattered notes. Poirot, with his characteristic unobtrusive charm, wandered the shelves, ostensibly browsing but closely observing Crane. The historian's notes were a chaotic sprawl of dates, names, and cryptic abbreviations. One page, briefly visible before Crane covered it, bore a sketch of the staircase, with the 17th step circled in red ink. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You are most thorough, Monsieur Crane," he remarked, picking up a volume on local folklore. "This legend of the step, it holds your interest, non?" Crane coughed, shuffling his papers. "It sets a curious detail, nothing more. The Blackthorns have a history of misfortune, and the staircase is a focal point in their lore." Poirot set the book down and approached the table. "And yet last night Sit's scream suggests the past is not so distant. Tell me, what else have you found in these archives? Something, perhaps, that connects to our present company." Cranestead's hands trembled slightly, and he pushed his spectacles up again. "Nothing specific, Monsieur Poirot, just patterns. The Blackthorns were a powerful family, but their wealth came with enemies, debts, rivalries, betrayals. It steps all there, buried in these pages." Poirot smiled, his green eyes sharp. "And you, monsieur, you seek to unearth these betrayals." Before Crane could respond, a sharp rap at the door interrupted them. Mr. Tobin, the groundskeeper, entered, his boots tracking mud onto the polished floor. "Beg pardon, milady sent me to check the windows." "Storm's coming." His eyes flicked to Crane's notes, and Poirot caught a fleeting tension between the two men. Tobin's presence in the library seemed unnecessary, and Poirot wondered if it was a pretext to observe or to warn. As Tobin left, Poirot decided to probe further. "Monsieur Crane, you were in your room when the scream sounded last night." "Oui? Yet your notebook, it is never far from your hand. Were you perhaps working on something related to this?" 17th Step. Crane Steck's face paled. "I was reviewing my research, yes, but I heard nothing until the scream woke me." Poirot nodded, his expression benign, but his mind racing. Crane's evasiveness, combined with the sketch of the staircase, suggested he knew more than he admitted. Was he merely a scholar, or did his research conceal a motive tied to the manor's secrets? Poirot resolved to keep a closer eye on him. Later, as the guests gathered in the drawing-room, Poirot took the opportunity to observe their interactions. Vivienne Larue, ever the performer, regaled Colonel Hawes with a story of her theatrical days, but her laughter seemed forced. The Colonel, nursing a brandy, responded gruffly, his eyes straying to Lady Blackthorne, who sat quietly by the fire. Miss Henshaw, embroidering a handkerchief, dropped her needle when Crane entered, her nervousness palpable. Poirot noted these dynamics, sensing undercurrents of distrust. He approached Lady Blackthorne, who was gazing at a portrait of her late husband. "Madame, this manor, it holds many stories. The 17th Step, why does it loom so large in your family sept's history?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening on her shawl. "It's a foolish legend, Monsieur Poirot, but it lingers. My husband dismissed it. But after his death, well, one begins to wonder." Her voice trailed off, and Poirot sensed she was withholding something. As the day wore on, Poirot returned to the staircase, examining the 17th Step again. He noticed a faint groove along its edge, as if something had been pried loose. Kneeling, he ran his fingers over the wood, his mind piecing together possibilities. Was the step a clue to a physical mechanism, or merely a symbol in a psychological game? The scream, the shadow, Crane's secrecy, all pointed to a deeper truth. That evening, as rain lashed the manor's windows, Poirot added to his notebook, "Dr. Crane conceals knowledge of the step. Sketch suggests intent. Tobin's presence in library suspicious. Lady Blackthorne fears more than she says." The historian's secret was a thread in the tapestry of Blackthorne Manor's mystery, and Poirot, with his unerring instinct, would pull it until the truth unraveled. Chapter 4. The Locked Room. The storm that had threatened Blackthorne Manor broke with fury in the early hours, thunder rattling the windows and rain hammering the ancient stone walls. Hercule Poirot, roused from a light sleep by the tempest's roar, was already dressed in his immaculate suit when a second, more human disturbance reached his ears, a cry of alarm from the corridor. It was not yet dawn, and the manor's gas lamps flickered weakly as Poirot stepped into the hallway, his cane in hand, his senses alert. The cry had come from Miss Clara Henshaw, who stood trembling outside Colonel Reginald Hawes's room, her hands clasped over her mouth. "Monsieur Poirot," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the storm. "The Colonel, he set's not answering. I knocked to bring him his morning tea, but the door set's locked, and there set's no sound." Poirot's green eyes narrowed as he approached the heavy oak door. He rapped sharply, calling, "Colonel Hawes, it is Poirot. Open the door, s'il vous plaît." Silence answered, broken only by the wind's howl. The other guests began to gather. Lady Blackthorne, her face pale but composed. Vivienne Larue, her silk robe slipping off one shoulder. Dr. Mortimer Crane, clutching his notebook, and Mr. Tobin, the groundskeeper, summoned from the servants' quarters, his boots still damp from the rain. Poirot tested the door, finding it firmly locked. "We must enter," he declared. "Monsieur Tobin, can you break it down?" Tobin, a burly man, nodded and threw his shoulder against the door. It shuddered but held, its lock unyielding. After a second attempt, the wood splintered, and the door swung inward, revealing a dimly lit room. The group gasped, in unison. Colonel Hawes lay sprawled on the floor beside his bed, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, his burgundy dressing gown twisted around him. His face was contorted in a grimace, but no blood or wounds were visible. The room was undisturbed, No overturned furniture, no signs of struggle, save for a peculiar, irregular stain on the carpet near the colonel's hand, dark and faintly glistening. Poirot knelt beside the body, his movements precise. "Do not touch anything," he instructed, his voice calm but commanding. He examined the colonel's face, noting the fixed pupils and a faint bluish tint around the lips. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "This is no natural death." He checked the pulse, confirming what he suspected. Colonel Hawes was dead, and had been for some hours. The room on the second floor, directly above the 17th step of the grand staircase, was sealed tight. The windows were locked from the inside, their latches rusted with age, and the storm outside made entry from the exterior impossible. The door's lock, now broken, had been intact when they entered, with the key still in the colonel's pocket. Poirot's mind raced. This was a classic locked-room mystery, a challenge to his little grey cells. He turned his attention to the stain on the carpet, a patch no larger than a saucer, its edges uneven. It was not blood, but something thicker, almost waxy. Poirot scraped a small sample onto a handkerchief, tucking it away for later analysis. He then inspected the room. The bed was unmade. A half-empty brandy glass sat on the nightstand, and a military medal gleamed on the dresser, its ribbon frayed. A small fireplace, cold and unused, offered no clues, and the walls bore no hidden panels, at least none immediately apparent. "Madame Blackthorne," Poirot said, rising, "when did you last see the colonel?" Lady Blackthorne, standing at the threshold, clutched her shawl. "Last night after the scream, he retired early, complaining of a headache. I thought nothing of it." Poirot turned to the others. "And you, mes amis?" Vivienne Leroux, her voice unsteady, claimed she returned to her room and slept fitfully. Dr. Crane said he stayed up late in the library reviewing notes and heard nothing unusual. Miss Henshaw, still shaken, admitted to pacing her room, unable to sleep after the maid's tale of the shadow. Tobin, gruff and reserved, said he was in the servants' quarters, tending to a leaking roof. Poirot noted their responses, his eyes catching the slightest hesitations. Vivienne's fleeting glance at Crane, Tobin's clenched fists. He returned to the body, examining the colonel's hands. The fingers were stiff, but one held a crumpled piece of paper, barely visible. Poirot carefully extracted it, a torn scrap with the words 17 and Beware scrawled in a shaky hand. He showed it to no one, slipping it into his pocket. The 17th step again, he thought, its shadow looming over this death. Poirot addressed the group.
"This is murder, mes amis."
The colonel did not die by accident or by his own hand. Someone entered this locked room, or made it appear so, and ended his life. I, Hercule Poirot, will discover how and why. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their trust in one another visibly fraying. Lady Blackthorne ordered the servants to cover the body and summoned the local constable, though the storm would delay his arrival. Poirot, undeterred, began a meticulous search of the room. He examined the lock, noting its sturdy mechanism, and tested the windows, confirming they had not been opened. The stain on the carpet intrigued him most. It was unlike anything he had encountered, neither blood nor ink, but something deliberate. As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered, his gaze drifting to the floor. The room's position above the 17th step was no coincidence. He was certain. He recalled the staircase faint groove. The scuff mark, the maid's shadow, was the step a physical clue or a psychological one, meant to evoke the manor's cursed legend? The scrap of paper suggested the latter, but Poirot trusted only evidence, not superstition. He questioned Annie, the maid, who had recovered enough to speak. She confirmed seeing no one near the colonel's room that night, but mentioned a faint creak on the staircase after the scream, which she attributed to the storm. Poirot thanked her, his mind cataloguing her words. A creak, a shadow, a locked room. Each piece was a thread in the tapestry of murder. Returning to his room, Poirot added to his notebook, Colonel Hawes murdered. Locked room, no entry. Stain on carpet, unusual substance. Note with 17 and Beware. Step central to motive. He closed the book, his thoughts turning to the guests. Crane's secrecy, Vivienne's evasiveness, Tobin's tension, each held a piece of the puzzle. The storm raged outside, but within Blackthorn Manor, a darker tempest was brewing, and Poirot was determined to navigate its heart. Chapter 5. The Actress Cest's Alibi. The storm that battered Blackthorn Manor showed no sign of relenting, its relentless rain and howling wind sealing the guests within the ancient walls. Hercule Poirot stood by a window in the drawing-room, his reflection sharp against the glass, his mind dissecting the murder of Colonel Reginald Hawes. The locked room, the cryptic note, the strange stain on the carpet, all pointed to a calculated crime, and the 17th step loomed ever larger in his thoughts. His attention, however, now turned to Vivienne Leroux, the glamorous actress whose charm masked a guarded nature. Her evasive answers and a fleeting phone call Poirot had overheard the previous evening made her a figure of interest. The guests, confined by the storm, gathered in the drawing-room, their faces drawn with unease. Lady Blackthorn sat by the fire, her composure strained, while Miss Clara Henshaw embroidered with trembling hands. Mortimer Crane, his notebook ever present, scribbled furiously, though his glances toward Vivienne suggested distraction. Mr. Tobin, summoned to repair a leaking window, worked silently, his presence a quiet undercurrent of tension. Vivienne, draped in a velvet shawl, sipped tea with an air of practiced nonchalance, but her eyes darted to the door whenever footsteps echoed from the hall. Poirot, with his characteristic tact, approached her. "Mademoiselle Leroux," he began, his voice smooth as velvet, "you are a woman of the stage, accustomed to commanding attention. Yet last night, when the scream awoke the manor, you seemed preoccupied. Tell Poirot, what troubles you?" Vivienne Sayre's laugh was light, but her fingers tightened around her teacup. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, you make too much of it. A scream in the night, a storm. It's sets enough to unsettle anyone. I was simply trying to sleep." Poirot's moustache twitched. "And yet, mademoiselle, I observed you earlier that evening in the corridor speaking on the telephone. Your voice was agitated. To whom were you speaking, and why?" The room fell silent. The guest-side eyes turning to Vivienne. Her smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "A personal matter, monsieur. An old friend from London, checking on my welfare. Nothing to do with this tragedy." Poirot nodded, his green eyes piercing. "And this friend, they called at a late hour, none? Most curious. And your whereabouts after the scream, back in your room, you said?" "Yes," she replied, her tone defiant. "I went straight to bed. The storm kept me awake, but I heard nothing until Miss Henshaw Sipser's cry this morning." Poirot paced slowly, his cane tapping the floor. "Yet your makeup, mademoiselle, when we gathered at the colonel's door, was smudged, as if applied in haste or perhaps reapplied after some disturbance. And your robe, it was not tied properly. These are small things, but to Poirot they speak volumes." Vivienne Seth's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. "You are very observant, monsieur, but I assure you I was in my room. The Colonel Seth's death is dreadful, but I had no part in it." Poirot turned to the group. "Mes amis, the Colonel was murdered in a locked room, a feat requiring cunning. I ask again, where were you all after the scream?" Their answers echoed their earlier statements. Crane in the library, Henshaw pacing, Tobin in the servants' quarters, Lady Blackthorn in her study. But Poirot noted Vivienne's hesitation, a fraction of a second too long. He decided to press further, inviting Vivienne for a private word in the library. The room, with its shelves of ancient tomes and the faint scent of dust, provided a fitting backdrop for interrogation. Poirot seated himself at the oak table, gesturing for Vivienne to sit opposite. "Mademoiselle, let us be frank. The Colonel's death is no accident, and your connection to him is not as distant as you claim. Tell Poirot the truth." Vivienne's composure cracked, her hands twisting in her lap. "Very well," she said softly. "I knew Reggie, Colonel Hawes, years ago during the war. He was an admirer. We had a brief affair, nothing serious, but it ended badly. He was possessive, and I was young, foolish. I hadn't seen him in years until this weekend." Poirot leaned forward. And this affair, it left bitterness. Enough, perhaps, to motive murder. No! Vivienne Sepp's voice rose, then softened. I moved on. My career, my life, it Sepp's all in London. I came here at Lady Blackthorn, Tepp's invitation. Nothing more. I swear I didn't Sepp's harm him. Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind remained sharp. And the phone call? To whom did you speak? She hesitated, then sighed. My agent, Lionel. His cell's been pressing me to return to the stage, but I cell's been avoiding it. My last performance flopped, and I cell's in debt. Lionel called to urge me to take a new role. I was upset, that cell's. Poirot noted her words, sensing partial truth. And the Colonel, did he speak to you of this past here at the Manor? Vivienne nodded reluctantly. Last night before the scream he cornered me in the hall. He was drunk, reminiscing, hinting he wanted to rekindle things. I brushed him off. That was the last I saw of him. Poirot filed this away, his thoughts returning to the locked room. The Colonel's note, 17 and beware, suggested a connection to the staircase, and Vivienne's past with him added a motive, however tenuous. He excused her, then examined the library, noting Crane's scattered notes still on the table. A page, partially obscured, mentioned a Blackthorn betrayal tied to the 1847 tragedy. Was Vivienne's history with the Colonel linked to the Manor's secrets? As the storm raged, Poirot returned to the drawing-room, where the guests' tension was palpable. Lady Blackthorn announced that the constable's arrival was delayed by flooded roads, leaving them isolated. Poirot observed Tobin, who lingered near the staircase, his eyes fixed on the 17th step. Was he guarding it or watching for something? Poirot approached the staircase, re-examining the 17th step's faint groove. He pressed it, but it yielded nothing new. The storm's gloom cast the step in shadow, echoing the maid's tale. He recalled Vivienne's smudged makeup, her evasive answers. Was she hiding a role in the murder, or merely her shame? In his room, Poirot updated his notebook. Vivienne Leroux affair with Hawes. Phone call suspicious. Motive possible but method unclear. 17th step central. The storm trapped them, but the real danger lay within the Manor's walls. Vivienne's alibi was shaky, but Poirot sensed others held secrets too. The truth, like the 17th step, waited to be uncovered. Chapter 6. The footprint on the step. The storm's unrelenting fury cloaked Blackthorn Manor in a grey veil, the rain drumming a ceaseless rhythm on the roof. Hercule Poirot stood at the base of the grand staircase, his sharp eyes fixed on the 17th step, which seemed to pulse with significance in the dim light of the chandelier. The murder of Colonel Reginald Hawes in a locked room, the cryptic note bearing the words 17 and beware, and Vivienne Leroux's shaky alibi had deepened the mystery. Yet it was the staircase, with its whispered curse and shadowy history, that drew Poirot's attention now. A new clue had emerged, one that promised to illuminate the path to truth, a footprint, faint but unmistakable, on the 17th step. Poirot had noticed it during his morning inspection, a subtle smudge of reddish-brown clay, distinct from the Manor's polished oak and the muddy tracks left by the storm-soaked grounds. Kneeling with the precision of a surgeon, he examined the mark, its edges irregular but clearly defined, a man's boot, size 10, with a worn heel. The clay was not native to the Manor's immediate grounds, which were sodden with black soil. This anomaly intrigued him. Mon Dieu, he murmured. A footprint that does not belong. It is a message, perhaps, from the killer. The guests, confined by the storm, were scattered throughout the Manor, their nerves frayed by the Colonel's death. Lady Blackthorn remained in the drawing-room, her composure a fragile mask. Vivienne Leroux, ever the actress, maintained her poise, though her eyes betrayed unease. Mortimer Crane, buried in his research, avoided conversation, while Miss Clara Henshaw hovered nervously, her embroidery abandoned. Mr. Tobin, the groundskeeper, had been summoned repeatedly to address storm damage, his gruff demeanour and frequent absences drawing Poirot's suspicion. Poirot sought out Tobin, finding him in the servants' quarters, polishing a pair of boots caked with mud. The groundskeeper looked up, his weathered face guarded. Monsieur Tobin, Poirot began, his tone cordial but probing. You are most diligent in your duties, even in this tempest. Tell Poirot, where were you last night, after the scream that woke the manor? Tobinsell's hands paused, his eyes narrowing. In the stables, like I said. Horses were spooked by the storm. Took me hours to calm them. Poirot nodded, his gaze drifting to the boots. And the grounds, you know them well. None. The soil, it is black and heavy here, yet I find clay on the 17th step, a reddish clay, most unusual. Have you seen such clay on the estate? Tobin Steed's jaw tightened, but he shook his head. Ain't Steed no clay like that around here. Must Steed been tracked in by a guest? Poirot's moustache twitched. Yet the guests, they remain indoors, and you, monsieur, are often outside. Perhaps you walked a path less travelled. Tobin stood abruptly, his boots clattering to the floor. I've work to do, sir. Storms made a mess of the gardens. He left, his stride too quick for innocence. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed. Tobin's evasion, combined with the footprint, suggested a connection to the colonel's death. He decided to explore the manor's grounds, despite the storm. Donning a borrowed overcoat and hat, he ventured into the rain-soaked gardens, his cane sinking slightly into the mud. The estate was vast, with tangled hedges and a winding path leading to a wooded area. There, near a disused well, Poirot hidden beneath overgrown brambles, he found a patch of reddish-brown clay, matching the footprint's hue. The discovery was no coincidence. This clay linked the grounds to the 17th step. Returning to the manor, Poirot sought Lady Blackthorne, finding her in the library where Dr. Cranesep's notes still littered the table. "Madam," he said, "this clay, it comes from your grounds, near the old well. Does Monsieur Tobin frequent that area?" Lady Blackthorne, Sip's eyes widened briefly. The well? The well? Sip's been abandoned for years. Tobin tends the gardens, but Sip's not seen him there. Why do you ask? Poirot smiled enigmatically. A small matter, madame. But tell me, what do you know of Tobin's history with the manor? She hesitated, her fingers twisting her shawl. Seb's been with us for a decade, hired after my husband Seb's death. A quiet man. Loyal, but private. He keeps to himself. Poirot nodded, filing away her words. He returned to the staircase, re-examining the footprint. The clay was fresh, applied within the last day, suggesting someone had been at the well recently. Was Tobin involved, or was he merely a convenient suspect? The 17th step's prominence in the colonel's death, its position below his room, the note's warning, suggested a deliberate act, perhaps to evoke the manor's cursed legend. In the drawing-room, the guest's tension was palpable. Vivienne Larue, aware of Poirot's scrutiny, avoided him, engaging Miss Henshaw in forced conversation. Crane, engrossed in a manuscript, glanced up as Poirot entered, his pen pausing. Poirot addressed the group. "Mes amis, a clue has emerged, a footprint on the 17th step, made in clay from the manor's grounds. Who among you has ventured outside in this storm?" Denials followed, swift and emphatic. Vivienne claimed she loathed the rain. Crane cited his library work, and Henshaw said she hadn't left the manor. Tobin, entering to stoke the fire, muttered he'd been in the stables or repairing leaks. Poirot's eyes lingered on him, noting the mud on his boots, black, not reddish-brown. A clever ruse, perhaps. Poirot approached Crane, whose notes mentioned the 1847 tragedy. "Monsieur Crane, this clay, does it appear in your research? A detail, perhaps, tied to the heiress Sep's death?" Crane adjusted his spectacles. The records mention a quarry near the well, long abandoned. Red clay was mined there, but it sits irrelevant to the Colonel Sep's death, surely. Poirot's smile was cryptic. "Nothing is irrelevant, monsieur," he recalled the Colonel's note. The locked room, Vivienne's past. The footprint was a bridge between the manor's past and present, and Tobin's behavior suggested he knew more than he admitted. That evening, as the storm raged, Poirot updated his notebook. Footprint on 17th step. Red clay from well. Tobin evasive. nose grounds. Link to 1847. Tragedy? The manor's secrets were unraveling, and the 17th Step was no mere legend. It was a stage for murder. Poirot's mind, sharp as ever, prepared to follow the Clay's trail to the killer. Chapter 7. The Missing Heirloom. The storm that imprisoned Blackthorn Manor showed no mercy, its relentless wind and rain isolating the guests within the ancient walls. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his gaze fixed on the 17th Step, where the faint reddish-brown footprint still lingered, a silent testament to the murder of Colonel Reginald Hawes. The locked room, the cryptic note, the clay from the abandoned well, all were pieces of a puzzle that Poirot's little grey cells were assembling with precision. Yet a new disturbance was about to complicate the mystery, one that would tie the manor's past to the present with unsettling clarity. As the guests gathered for a late breakfast, their faces drawn with fatigue and suspicion, Lady Evelyn Blackthorn entered the dining room, her composure shattered. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, "a calamity has befallen us. The Blackthorn sapphire, a family heirloom, has been stolen from my safe." The room fell silent, the guests exchanging wary glances. Vivienne Larue's teacup clattered against its saucer. Dr. Mortimer Crane's pen paused mid-stroke. Miss Clara Henshaw gasped, and Mr. Tobin, lingering near the door, shifted uncomfortably. Poirot Sipsa's eyes gleamed with interest. "Madame, this is most serious. Tell Poirot's of this sapphire, and when you discovered its absence." Lady Blackthorn explained that the sapphire brooch, a flawless gem set in intricate silver, had been in her family for generations, valued not only for its beauty, but for its historical significance. It was kept in a locked safe in her study, accessible only by a key she wore on a chain around her neck. "I checked the safe this morning after the Colonel's death," she said. "The brooch was gone, though the safe showed no signs of tampering." Poirot requested to see the study, and Lady Blackthorn led him to a small, elegant room lined with books and adorned with a portrait of her late husband, Sir Edmund Blackthorn. The safe, hidden behind a panel, was a sturdy iron box with a complex lock. Poirot examined it closely, noting the absence of scratches or forced entry. The key, still on Lady Blackthorn's chain, turned smoothly, revealing an empty velvet-lined compartment. "Most curious," Poirot murmured. "A theft without violence, yet timed with a murder. The two, they are connected, non." Returning to the dining room, Poirot addressed the guests. "Mes amis, the theft of the sapphire is no coincidence. It is a thread in the tapestry of Colonel Hotspur's death. I ask you, have any of you seen this brooch, or noticed anything unusual near the study?" Denials followed, but Poirot's keen eyes caught subtleties. Vivienne's forced smile, Crane's nervous adjustment of his spectacles, Henshaw's trembling hands, Tobin's averted gaze. The guests' financial troubles hinted at through overheard conversations and subtle clues now took center stage. Poirot had noticed a crumpled bill in Vivienne's handbag, marked overdue. Crane's threadbare coat suggested strained means. Henshaw's modest attire belied her role as a companion, and Tobin, despite his loyalty, had once muttered about unpaid wages. The sapphire, worth a fortune, was a motive for theft, and perhaps murder. Poirot's thoughts returned to the 17th Step. The Colonel's room directly above it, and the footprints clay suggested a physical link. He excused himself to re-examine the staircase, descending to the 17th Step with deliberate care. The groove he had noted earlier caught his attention again, a faint, almost imperceptible seam along the step's edge. Kneeling, he pressed it with his cane, and to his surprise, a small section of the wood shifted, revealing a hollow compartment no larger than a cigar box. It was empty, but its existence was a revelation. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered. "The step, it is not merely cursed, it is crafted." He summoned Lady Blackthorn, who joined him with a puzzled expression. "Madame, this compartment in the 17th Step, did you know of it?" Her eyes widened. "No, Monsieur Poirot. The staircase is centuries old, but I never heard of such a thing. My husband restored parts of the manor, but he never mentioned this." Poirot's mind raced. The compartment suggested the step had been designed to conceal something, perhaps the sapphire or a clue to the Colonel's murder. Its proximity to the locked room above hinted at a mechanism, though how it was used remained unclear. He resolved to investigate the manor's architectural records, suspecting Dr. Crane's research might hold answers. In the library, Poirot found Crane hunched over his notes, a blueprint of the Manor Sept's original design spread before him. "Monsieur Crane," Poirot said, "this staircase, it intrigues you. Have you found mention of a hidden compartment in the 17th step?" Crane paled, his fingers twitching. "A compartment? No, the records are incomplete. The staircase was built in the 17th century, with modifications in the 1800s. His friends found nothing about hidden features." Poirot Sipta's smile was enigmatic. "Yet your blueprint, it marks the 17th step." Crane stammered. "A coincidence. I was studying the Manor Sept structure, nothing more." Poirot noted the lie, but let it pass, his attention drawn to a marginal note in Crane's handwriting. "Staircase altered 1847, post Eleanor's death." The year of the heiress' fall, tied to the 17th step's legend, was no coincidence. Was the compartment added then to hide evidence of her murder, or something else? As the day wore on, the storm's isolation tightened its grip. Poirot overheard a heated exchange between Vivienne and Henshaw in the corridor, Vivienne whispering about debts too heavy to bear. Tobin, repairing a shutter, avoided Poirot's gaze, his boots still free of reddish clay. The sapphire's theft, timed with the Colonel's murder, suggested a killer with access to the Manor's secrets and the 17th step. That evening, Poirot updated his notebook. Sapphire stolen, safe unforced. Compartment in 17th step. Empty. Financial motives among guests. Crane conceals knowledge. The Manor was a labyrinth of deception, and the 17th step was its heart. Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, sensing the thief and the murderer were one or dangerously close. Chapter 8. The Second Victim. The storm that besieged Blackthorn Manor raged into its third day, its howling winds and torrential rain cloaking the estate in a shroud of unease. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his sharp eyes fixed on the 17th step, where the reddish-brown clay footprint and the hidden compartment had deepened the mystery of Colonel Reginald Hawes's murder and the theft of the Blackthorn sapphire. The Colonel's locked room, the cryptic note bearing 17 and beware, Vivienne Leroux's evasive alibi, Mr. Tobin's suspicious knowledge of the grounds, and Dr. Mortimer Crane's secretive research formed a complex puzzle. Poirot's little grey cells were alight, but a new tragedy was about to strike, thrusting the 17th step into sharper focus. It was just after midnight when a sharp crash, followed by a strangled cry, shattered the Manor's uneasy silence. Poirot, roused from his meticulous note-taking in his room, seized his cane and hurried into the corridor, where gas lamps cast flickering shadows. The sound had come from the grand staircase. The guests emerged, their faces pale with dread. Lady Blackthorn, her nightgown hastily covered by a shawl, Vivienne Leroux, her silk robe loosely tied, Miss Clara Henshaw clutching a candle with trembling hands, and Mr. Tobin summoned from the servants' quarters, his boots dripping with rainwater. They converged at the base of the staircase, where a horrific sight awaited. Dr. Mortimer Crane lay sprawled across the 17th step, his body limp, his spectacles shattered beside him. His face was ashen, his lips tinged blue, and his eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. A wine-glass lay overturned on the step below, its contents staining the oak a deep crimson. Poirot knelt beside the body, his movements precise despite the gasps of the onlookers. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "Another murder, and once again the 17th step claims its victim." He examined Crane's body, noting the bluish tint around the lips, eerily similar to Colonel Hawes's. No blood or wounds were visible, but a faint, bitter odor emanated from the spilled wine. Poison, Poirot deduced, though the method was unclear. He carefully lifted the wine-glass, observing a sticky residue inside, and placed it on a nearby table for later analysis. In Crane's clenched hand, he found a crumpled note, its edges torn. Written in the historian's meticulous script were the words, "The step conceals all." Poirot slipped the note into his pocket, his mind racing. "Madame Blackthorne," he said, rising. "When did you last see Monsieur Crane?" Her voice trembled. "At dinner, Monsieur Poirot." He was withdrawn, engrossed in his notes. He left early, saying he needed to work in the library. Poirot turned to the others. "And you, mes amis, your whereabouts when this tragedy struck?" Vivienne Leroux, her voice unsteady, claimed she was in her room, reading a script. Miss Henshaw, near tears, said she was writing letters, unable to sleep. Tobin, his expression grim, stated he was in the attic repairing a storm-damaged beam. Their alibis echoed their earlier ones, but Poirot noted Vivienne's smudged eyeliner, Henshaw's trembling fingers, and Tobin's tense posture, suggesting hidden truths. He examined the scene further. The 17th Step's hidden compartment, discovered earlier, was closed, but a fresh scratch near its seam suggested recent tampering. The spilled wine had mingled with the clay footprint, smearing it slightly, as if someone had stepped through it in haste. The note, like the Colonel's, pointed to the step, reinforcing its role in the murders. Was the wine the poison's vehicle, or a staged distraction? Poirot addressed the group. "This is murder, mes amis. Dr. Crane was poisoned, and the 17th Step is no coincidence. It is the killer Sep's canvas. I, Hercule Poirot, will uncover their design." The guests exchanged fearful glances, their trust in one another visibly fraying. Lady Blackthorne ordered the servants to cover Crane's body and secure the staircase, though the storm still delayed the constable's arrival. Poirot, undeterred, began his investigation. He collected a sample of the wine, its bitter scent confirming his suspicions, and examined the glass, finding only Crane's fingerprints. The library, where Crane had spent his final hours, was his next destination. In the library, Crane's notes lay scattered across the oak table with a blueprint of the manor's staircase prominently displayed. An annotation read, 1847, step modified, secret known. Another note mentioned the sapphire, calling it the key to the curse. Poirot's mind seized on this. Had Crane uncovered the step's compartment, or the sapphire's role in Eleanor Blackthorne's death? His note, "The step conceals all," suggested he knew a dangerous truth, one that cost him his life. Poirot questioned Annie, the maid who had served dinner. She recalled Crane drinking from the communal decanter shared by all guests. "He was fidgety, sir," she said, kept glancing at the staircase like he was waiting for something. Returning to the drawing-room, Poirot observed the guests. Vivienne avoided his gaze, her fingers twisting her shawl. Henshaw, near collapse, muttered about the manor's curse. Tobin, stoking the fire, kept his eyes on the floor. Poirot addressed them. "The wine was poisoned, mes amis, from a decanter you all used. Who had opportunity to tamper with it?" Denials followed, but Poirot's eyes caught Vivienne's fleeting glance at Tobin, and Henshaw's stifled sob. He recalled the Colonel's diary mentioning Vivienne and Crane in a wartime betrayal, and Tobin's possible involvement. The sapphire's theft, the passage, the step's compartment, all were linked, and the killer was among them. As the guests retired, Poirot returned to the staircase, examining the 17th Step. The scratch on the compartment suggested someone had checked it, perhaps seeking the sapphire. The wine's stain, the note, the clay, all were deliberate, evoking the manor's legend to mask murder. In his room, Poirot updated his notebook. Crane poisoned on 17th Step. Wine-tainted note. The step conceals all. Sapphire tied to 1847. Killer uses step's legend. The storm raged, but Poirot's resolve was unshaken. The 17th Step was the killer's stage, and he was closer to unmasking them. Chapter 9. The Hidden Passage. The storm that gripped Blackthorne Manor showed no signs of abating, its relentless wind and rain sealing the ancient estate in a cocoon of isolation. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his sharp eyes fixed on the 17th Step, where the smeared footprint, spilled wine, and hidden compartment wove a complex web around the murders of Colonel Reginald Hawes and Dr. Mortimer Crane. The stolen sapphire brooch, The cryptic notes and the guests' guarded behaviors pointed to a killer with intimate knowledge of the manor's secrets. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed, sensing the 17th step was not just a stage for death, but a gateway to truth. A new discovery was about to shift the investigation, revealing a hidden passage that would illuminate the manor's dark past. It was mid-morning, the manor's gloom deepened by the storm's grey light, when Poirot returned to the staircase for another inspection. The 17th step, with its faint groove and concealed compartment, intrigued him. He had examined it repeatedly, but now his attention was drawn to the oak paneling along the wall beside it. A slight irregularity, a panel slightly misaligned, caught his eye. He pressed it with his cane, and with a soft click, the panel slid inward, revealing a narrow, cobweb-draped passage, descending into darkness. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, "the manor, it keeps its secrets close." He retrieved a candle from a nearby sconce and stepped into the passage, his polished shoes echoing on the stone floor. The air was musty, thick with the scent of damp earth and thyme. The passage wound downward, then upward, emerging in a dusty attic cluttered with crates, old furniture, and yellowed documents. A single, grimy window admitted a sliver of light, illuminating a wooden chest tucked in a corner. Poirot opened it, revealing a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, their wax seals bearing the Blackthorn crest. The letters, dated 1847, were written by Eleanor Blackthorn, the heiress, whose death on the 17th step had birthed the manor's curse. Poirot read carefully, his green eyes narrowing. Eleanor wrote of a family scandal, a disputed inheritance, a rival suitor, and a betrayal by her brother Thomas Blackthorn. One letter hinted at a secret meeting on the staircase, where she feared for her life. "The 17th step will be my undoing," she wrote, "for it hides what must not be found." Poirot's moustache twitched. The step's compartment, the sapphire, the murders, all were tied to this long-buried scandal. He returned to the grand hall, the letters tucked in his coat, and summoned Lady Blackthorn. "Madame," he said, "this passage, it was known to your family, non, and these letters, they speak of Eleanor Sipp's fears. What do you know of this?" Lady Blackthornset's face paled, but she shook her head. "I knew of no passage. The manor is old, full of quirks, but my husband never spoke of such a thing. As for Eleanor, her story is legend, nothing more." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Yet legends, madame, often hide truths. The 17th step, it is no mere superstition, it is a key." The guests gathered in the drawing-room were restless, their nerves frayed by the second murder. Vivienne Leroux, her charm strained, toyed with her shawl, her eyes avoiding Poirot. Miss Clara Henshaw, pale and silent, clutched a handkerchief, while Mr. Taubin, repairing a shutter, glanced at the staircase with unease. Poirot observed them, noting their reactions to the news of the passage. "Mes amis," he announced, "a hidden passage has been found, leading from the staircase to an attic. It suggests our killer moves unseen. Who among you knows of this?" Denials followed, but Poirot caught Vivienne's fleeting glance at Taubin, and Henshaw's hands trembling more than usual. Taubin, his voice gruff, said, "I've worked the grounds 10 years, never seen no passage." Yet his eyes lingered on the panel, now closed, as if he recognized it. Poirot decided to probe further, inviting Taubin for a private word in the library. "Monsieur Taubin," he said, "you know the Manor Sep's grounds, its secrets, the clay on the 17th step, the passage. Have you encountered such things in your work?" Taubin-Seau's jaw tightened. "I told you I stick to the gardens. D'Honesty know nothing about passages or clay." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Yet you were quick to arrive after Craneset's death, and your boots, they are always wet even when the clay is not present. Tell Poirot, what do you hide?" Taubin's fists clenched, but he said nothing, leaving with a muttered excuse about storm repairs. Poirot noted his agitation, suspecting the groundskeeper knew more about the passage than he admitted. The letters, the compartment, the footprint, all pointed to a killer exploiting the manor's architecture. In the drawing-room, tensions boiled over. Vivienne snapped at Henshaw for her nervous fidgeting, while Henshaw retorted, "You're no saint, Vivienne. with your secrets." Poirot intervened, his calm authority restoring order. He turned to Vivienne. "Mademoiselle, you knew the Colonel, and perhaps Crane. Did they speak of the manor's history or this passage?" Vivienne Sept's laugh was brittle. They were old men, full of stories. I paid no mind. Poirot's thoughts returned to Crane's note. The step hides the truth. Had Crane discovered the passage, or the letters, and paid with his life? The sapphire's theft tied to Eleanor's era suggested a motive rooted in the past. He examined the staircase again, noting the passage's entrance was near the 17th step, accessible only to someone familiar with the manor's quirks. That evening, as the storm raged, Poirot updated his notebook. Hidden passage found, leads to attic. Eleanor's letters reveal scandal. Fear of 17th step. Tobin evasive, knows more. Sapphire key to motive. The manor was a labyrinth, and the 17th step its heart. Poirot's resolve hardened. He would follow the passage to the truth, no matter how dark. Chapter 10. The Colonel Septa's Diary. The storm that enveloped Blackthorn Manor raged on, its howling winds and relentless rain casting a claustrophobic gloom over the ancient estate. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his sharp eyes lingering on the 17th step, where the hidden passage, the reddish-brown footprint, and the spilled wine from Dr. Mortimer Crane's death intertwined with the murder of Colonel Reginald Hawes and the theft of the Blackthorn sapphire. The hidden compartment, Eleanor Blackthorn's letters, and the cryptic notes 17 and Beware for Hawes. The step hides the truth for Crane, pointed to a killer exploiting the manor's secrets. Poirot's little grey cells were alight, and a new discovery was about to deepen the mystery. The Colonel's diary, a treasure trove of coded secrets. It was late morning, the manor's dim light filtering through rain-streaked windows, when Poirot requested access to Colonel Hawes's belongings, still secured in his locked room. Lady Blackthorn, her face etched with strain, provided the key, and Poirot entered the chamber where the Colonel had met his end. The room remained as it was, bed unmade, brandy glass on the nightstand, the peculiar waxy stain on the carpet. Poirot's meticulous search led him to a leather-bound diary tucked beneath the mattress, its pages worn but intact. The entries, written in Hawes's precise hand, were interspersed with cryptic notations, strings of numbers and letters that suggested a code. Poirot settled at a small desk, his green eyes gleaming as he examined the diary. The entries chronicled Hawes' military career, with frequent mentions of a 1917 incident during the Great War. One passage dated weeks before the manor gathering read VL and MC were there, betrayal at Ypres. T. knows too. The debt remains, another in code 317-2. VL MC T seemed to reference the same event. Poirot's mind raced. VL was surely Vivienne Larue, MC likely Mortimer Crane, and T could be Tobin. The 17th step, with its recurring significance, echoed the number 17 in the code. Was this a coincidence or a deliberate link? He deciphered the code using a simple substitution cipher, common among military men of Hawes's era. The numbers 317-2 translated to a date, March 17, 1917, and the initials pointed to a wartime betrayal. The diary's later entries grew paranoid. They're here at the manor. The step will judge them. Poirot's moustache twitched. The Colonel had known something dangerous, and his death, followed by Crane's, suggested a motive rooted in this past. Poirot summoned Lady Blackthorn to the library, where he shared his findings, omitting the code sep's details. Madame, the Colonel wrote of a wartime incident involving certain guests. Did he ever speak of this to you? Her hands twisted her shawl. Reginald was a friend of my husband, Set's, a frequent guest. He mentioned Ypres once, a failed operation but never elaborated. He was troubled in recent years. Poirot nodded, his thoughts turning to Vivienne Larue and Mr. Tobin. Vivienne's affair with Hawes, revealed earlier, placed her in his orbit during the war. Tobin, a groundskeeper with a decade at the manor, could have a military past. But what of Crane? His research into the Blackthorn family suggested he had uncovered a connection, perhaps through Eleanor's letters or the sapphire's history. In the drawing-room, the guests' tension was palpable. Vivienne, her charm fraying, snapped at Miss Clara Henshaw, who dropped her teacup, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "Clara, for heaven's sake, pull yourself together," Vivienne hissed. Henshaw's eyes filled with tears, and she fled the room, her footsteps echoing toward the staircase. Poirot noted her erratic behavior. Her nervousness had escalated since Crane's death, suggesting fear or guilt. He followed Henshaw, finding her in the hall, staring at the 17th step. "Mademoiselle Henshaw," he said gently, "you are troubled. Tell Poirot what weighs on you." She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "It sets the manner. The deaths. I can set bear it." Poirot Sips's eyes softened, but his mind was sharp. "And yet you tremble when the step is mentioned. Did you see something, perhaps, the night of the scream?" Henshaw Sips's gaze darted away. "No, nothing. I was in my room." Poirot let her go, noting her distress. He approached Vivienne next in the library, where she was flipping through a magazine with feigned interest. "Mademoiselle Leroux," he said, "the Colonel Sepp's diary speaks of you, of Ypres 1917. A betrayal, it seems. What can you tell, Poirot?" Vivienne Sepp's face paled, but her voice remained steady. "Yep. I was a nurse then, briefly. I met Reggie, Colonel Hawes, there. It was chaotic, but I betrayed no one. He was delusional, writing nonsense." Poirot Sips's smile was cryptic. "And yet he named you, and Crane, and perhaps Tobin, the 17th step. It haunts his words, as it does this manner." Vivienne stood abruptly. "I've nothing more to say, monsieur." She left, her heels clicking sharply. Poirot sought Tobin, finding him in the stables brushing a horse with unnecessary vigor. "Monsieur Tobin," he said. "The colonel wrote of a man, Vitace, Futin, a wartime betrayal. You served none." Tobin Dest's brush paused. I served, but I don't serve no betrayal. Pause was a hard man, held grudges. I kept my head down." Poirot noted Tobin's clenched jaw, his refusal to meet his gaze. The groundskeeper's military past, combined with his knowledge of the manor's grounds and the clay footprint, made him a figure of interest. Yet Henshaw's growing agitation gnawed at Poirot. Was she a witness or something more? That evening, as the storm roared, Poirot examined the 17th step again. The hidden compartment, the passage, the footprint, all were tied to the diary's revelations. He returned to the library where Crane's notes mentioned the 1847 staircase alteration, possibly to conceal the passage or the sapphire. The colonel's code, with its 17, mirrored the step, suggesting he knew of its significance. Poirot updated his notebook, Colonel's diary, coded entries. Ypres betrayal, 1917. Links, Vivienne, Crane, Tobin, Henshaw erratic, possible witness. Step central to motive. The manor's secrets were unraveling, and the 17th step was the fulcrum. Poirot's resolve hardened. He would decipher the past to catch a killer. Chapter 11. The Night of Confessions. The storm that held Blackthorn Manor in its grip roared on, its relentless winds rattling the windows and casting flickering shadows across the grand hall. Hercule Poirot stood by the 17th step, its hidden compartment smeared footprint and ominous history a constant refrain in his mind. The murders of Colonel Reginald Hawes and Dr. Mortimer Crane, the stolen Blackthorn sapphire, and the revelations from the Colonel's diary and Eleanor Blackthorn's letters pointed to a killer weaving a deadly tapestry of past and present. The hidden passage, the cryptic notes and the guests' guarded behaviors, Vivienne Leroux's wartime connection, Mr. Tobin's evasiveness, Miss Clara Henshaw's growing agitation, demanded a confrontation. Tonight, Poirot resolved to use his little grey cells to provoke the truth. As dusk settled, Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing-room, its firelight casting an eerie glow on their tense faces. Lady Blackthorn sat rigidly, her hands folded tightly. Vivienne Leroux, her charm fraying, sipped brandy with forced nonchalance. Miss Henshaw, pale and trembling, clutched a handkerchief, her eyes darting to the door. Mr. Tobin stood by the fireplace, his weathered face unreadable. The air was thick with suspicion, the storm's howl a grim underscore to the gathering. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding. "Two men are dead. Colonel Hawes in a locked room, Dr. Crane on the 17th step. A sapphire is stolen, a passage revealed, a diary uncovered. These are not random acts. Someone in this room weaves a web of deception, and I, Hercule Poirot, will unravel it. Let us speak plainly. Who among you has a truth to confess?" The guests shifted uncomfortably, their silence heavy. Poirot sipped's eyes swept over them, noting every gesture. He turned to Vivienne. "Mademoiselle Larue, the Colonel sipped's diary speaks of you, of Ypres, 1917. A betrayal. You admitted to an affair, but there is more." "None?" Vivienne's glass trembled, her voice sharp. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot, it was nothing. Reggie was obsessed, clinging to old grudges. I was a nurse, not a traitor. But, yes, I took money from him during the war. He thought it bought my loyalty. It didn't." Her confession hung in the air, her eyes defiant but haunted. Poirot nodded, turning to Miss Henshaw. "Mademoiselle Henshaw, you tremble at the mention of the 17th step. The night of the scream, you were not in your room, were you? You saw something." Henshaw's handkerchief twisted in her hands, her voice a whisper. I couldn't sleep. I was in the corridor near the staircase. I saw a shadow, not just the maid's vision. It moved, then vanished. I was too afraid to speak." Her eyes filled with tears, and Lady Blackthorne reached for her hand, though her own expression was strained. Poirot Sipt's gaze shifted to Tobin. "Monsieur Tobin, you know the Manor Sipt's grounds, its secrets, the clay footprint, the passage. Your denials are unconvincing. Did you know of the Colonel Sipt's diary, or Crane Sipt's research?" Tobin's fists clenched, his voice gruff. "I served with Hawes, He was a hard man, made enemies. I heard him muttering about the step, about debts, but I ain't no killer, and I don't know no passage." His eyes flicked to the door, betraying unease. Lady Blackthorne spoke, her voice steady but thin. "Monsieur Poirot, I invited you here suspecting trouble. Reginald hinted at old scores being settled, but I never imagined murder. The sapphire, the step, its steps, all tied to my family Sep's past, isn't set it." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Well, madame, the 17th step is no curse. It is a tool used by a killer to evoke fear and conceal truth. The diary, the letters, the passage, they point to a motive rooted in betrayal, perhaps from 1917, perhaps from 1847. Let us consider who benefits from these deaths." The room erupted in accusations. Vivienne pointed at Tobin. "He's always skulking about, knowing more than he says." Tobin retorted, "You're one to talk with your debts and your secrets." Henshaw sobbed. "I only wanted to help Lady Blackthorne." Lady Blackthorne silenced them, her authority faltering but firm. Poirot raised a hand. "Enough. Each confession reveals a piece of the puzzle. Mademoiselle Larue, your debt to the Colonel suggests motive. Mademoiselle Henshaw, your shadow confirms the killer's movements. Monsieur Tobin, your knowledge of the manor implicates you. And Madame Blackthorne, your invitation to Poirot was no accident. But there is more. The sapphire, the step, the poison, they are linked." He paced, his cane tapping rhythmically. The Colonel Sep's note said 17 Seps and Thebes, Seps Crane Seps said Sep Thebes, Seps Steve set the hidden compartment, the passage, the clay. They suggest a killer who knows the Manor Sep's secrets. I ask again, who has been near the 17th step? Silence followed, broken by Henshaw's choked sob. "I saw the shadow again last night, before Dr. Crane died. It was someone in a cloak, moving toward the passage." Her voice faltered, and Poirot's eyes gleamed. A cloaked figure, deliberate, calculated, using the manor's architecture. He turned to Vivienne. "Mademoiselle, your debts, did the sapphire tempt you?" She shook her head fiercely, but her eyes betrayed fear. To Tobin. "Monsieur, the clay came from the well. Have you been there?" Tobin's denial was curt, but his hands shook. To Lady Blackthorne. "Madame, the sapphire's history, Eleanor's betrayal, does it live in someone here?" Her silence was answer enough. As the guests dispersed, their confessions ringing in his ears, Poirot returned to the 17th step. He opened the hidden compartment, finding it still empty, but noticed a faint scratch inside, as if something had been removed recently. The passage, the diary, the sapphire, all pointed to a killer manipulating the manor's history. In his room, Poirot updated his notebook. Confessions, Vivienne's debt, Henshaw's shadow, Tobin's knowledge, cloaked figure in passage. Sapphire motive tied to 1847 and 1917. The storm raged, but Poirot's mind was clear. The 17th step was the killer's stage, and he would set a trap to unmask them. Chapter 12. The Trap on the Staircase. The storm that held Blackthorn Manor captive roared into its fourth day, its unrelenting winds and rain cloaking the estate in an oppressive gloom. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his sharp green eyes fixed on the 17th step, where the hidden compartment, smeared clay footprint, and spilled wine had woven a deadly tapestry around the murders of Colonel Reginald Hawes and Dr. Mortimer Crane, and the theft of the Blackthorn sapphire. The Colonel's coded diary, Eleanor Blackthorn's letters, the hidden passage, and the guests' confessions, Vivienne Leroux's wartime debt, Miss Clara Henshaw's sighting of a cloaked figure, Mr. Tobin's evasiveness, and Lady Blackthorn's guarded knowledge pointed to a killer exploiting the manor's secrets. Poirot's little grey cells were primed, and tonight he would set a trap to unmask the murderer, using the 17th step as bait. The guests, their nerves frayed by confinement and fear, gathered in the drawing-room after dinner, their faces lit by the flickering fire. Lady Blackthorne sat rigidly, her hands clasped tightly. Vivienne Leroux, her charm barely masking her unease, sipped brandy with trembling fingers. Miss Henshaw, pale and jittery, clutched a handkerchief, her eyes darting to the door. Mr. Tobin, stoking the fire, stood with a guarded expression, his boots still damp from the storm. Poirot, his presence commanding, paced before them, his cane tapping rhythmically. "Mes amis," he began, his voice calm but laced with authority. "Two murders, a stolen sapphire, a hidden passage, and a step that haunts us all. The 17th step is no curse. It is a tool used by a killer to conceal and deceive. Tonight I, Hercule Poirot, have news. The Blackthorn sapphire has been found." The room erupted in gasps. Lady Blackthorn Sept's eyes widened. "Found? Where, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot sits, mustache twitched, his gaze sweeping the group. "In the hidden compartment of the 17th step. I discovered it this afternoon, but I have left it there, under watch, to see who claims it. The killer, I believe, will return to the step tonight, drawn by greed or fear." The lie was deliberate, a bait to provoke action. The compartment was empty, but Poirot had dusted it with a fine powder, invisible in the dim light, that would cling to anyone who opened it. He had also placed a small bell inside, rigged to chime if disturbed. The guests' reactions were telling. Vivienne's glass clinked against the table, Henshaw's handkerchief twisted tighter, Tobin's jaw clenched, and Lady Blackthorn's composure faltered briefly. "I urge you," Poirot continued, "to remain in your rooms tonight. The staircase is under my surveillance. The killer will not escape." The guests retired, their unease palpable. Poirot positioned himself in a shadowed alcove near the staircase, hidden behind a velvet curtain, his watch in hand. The manor was silent, save for the storm's roar, and the 17th step gleamed faintly under the chandelier's glow. Hours passed, the clock striking midnight. Then 1. Poirot's patience was unwavering, his senses alert. At 2:30, a faint creak echoed from the corridor. A cloaked figure emerged, moving stealthily toward the staircase. Poirot's heart quickened, but he remained still, observing. The figure paused on the 17th step, glancing around, then knelt and pressed the hidden compartment's seam. The soft chime of the bell rang out, and the figure froze, startled. Poirot stepped forward, his cane raised. "Halt! It is Poirot. You are caught." The figure spun, the cloak-sip's hood falling to reveal Miss Clara Henshaw, her face pale, her hands dusted with Poirot-Sip's powder. "Monsieur Poirot," she gasped, her voice trembling. I only wanted to see if it was true." Poirot-Sip's eyes narrowed. "Mademoiselle Henshaw, you move in secret to a step you fear." She collapsed onto the step, sobbing. "I didn't kill them. I saw the shadow. I swear, I thought, if the sapphire was there, it would explain everything. I served some in debt, monsieur, to a man in London. I thought I could sell it, start over." Poirot's expression softened, but his mind was sharp. "And the shadow, mademoiselle, the cloaked figure you saw. It was real," she insisted. "That night before Dr. Crane died, I saw someone in a cloak near the passage. I was too afraid to speak." Poirot helped her to her feet, noting the powder on her hands but no trace of the sapphire. Her story rang true, but her actions suggested desperation. He escorted her to Lady Blackthorne, who was roused by the commotion. Mademoiselle Henshaw sought the sapphire, but she is not our killer. The trap, it has revealed a truth, but not the whole." Returning to the staircase, Poirot examined the compartment. The bell had been triggered, but a new clue emerged, a single thread, dark green, caught in the seam. It matched nothing in Henshaw's attire, but Poirot recalled Vivienne's shawl, a deep emerald green. Had she too been at the step, or was this a plant to mislead? He confronted Vivienne in her room, her face pale as he showed her the thread. "Mademoiselle, your shawl, it leaves its mark. Were you at the step tonight?" Vivienne Sept's eyes widened, but she shook her head. "I was in my room, monsieur. That thread could be anyone Sept's." Poirot-Sip's smile was cryptic. "Yet it is yours, and the step draws you. The killer made a mistake tonight, and Poirot is close." As dawn broke, the storm unrelenting, Poirot updated his notebook. Trap set. Henshaw caught, not killer. Green thread. Vivienne's shawl. Cloaked figure uses passage. Sapphire bait draws truth. The 17th step had spoken, and the killer's mistake, a thread, a moment of panic, brought Poirot closer to the denouement. Chapter 13. The truth unveiled. The storm that had besieged Blackthorn Manor for days began to wane, its howling winds softening to a mournful whisper, as if the estate itself sensed the approaching resolution. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand library, its shelves of ancient tomes and flickering firelight casting an air of solemnity. The 17th step, with its hidden compartment, clay footprint, spilled wine, and dark history, had woven a deadly thread through the murders of Colonel Reginald Hawes and Dr. Mortimer Crane, and the theft of the Blackthorn sapphire. The Colonel's coded diary, Eleanor Blackthorn's letters, the hidden passage, and the guest's confessions, Vivienne LaRue's wartime debt, Miss Clara Henshaw's desperate search, Mr. Tobin's evasiveness, had led Poirot to this moment. Tonight he would reveal the killer, using the 17th step as the key to unlock the truth. The guests gathered in the library, their faces etched with dread and anticipation. Lady Blackthorne sat at the head of the room, her composure brittle. Vivienne LaRue, her charm eroded by fear, clutched a shawl, emerald green matching the thread found on the step. Miss Henshaw, pale and trembling, sat near Lady Blackthorne, her eyes downcast. Mr. Tobin stood by the door, his weathered hands restless. Poirot, his presence commanding, paced before them, his cane tapping softly, his green eyes gleaming with certainty. "Mes amis," he began, his voice steady and resonant, "2 men are dead, a sapphire stolen, a passage uncovered, and a step, the 17th, haunts us all. This is no curse, but a crime, meticulously planned. I, Hercule Poirot, have pieced together the puzzle, and the truth lies before us. The 7 Poirots and Forets, il fein betteurs." He turned to the group. "Let us begin with the clues. Colonel Hawes, murdered in a locked room, left a note 17 and beware. Dr. Crane, poisoned on the 17th step, left another, the step hides the truth. A footprint of red clay, a hidden compartment, a passage to an attic, letters from 1847, a diary from 1917, all point to a killer who uses the manor's secrets. But why the step? Poirot paused, his gaze sweeping the room. The 17th step was altered in 1847, after Eleanor Blackthorne's death, to conceal a compartment. Her letters spoke of betrayal, a disputed inheritance, and a sapphire, stolen then, returned later. The step became a legend, a curse, to deter curiosity, but someone knew its secret. He turned to Lady Blackthorne. "Madame, you invited Poirot, suspecting trouble." The Colonel Sepp's diary revealed a wartime betrayal at Ypres 1917 involving Vivienne Leroux, Dr. Crane, and Mr. Tobin. A debt, a grudge, carried to this manor. Vivienne gasped. "I took money, yes, but I didn't kill." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, mademoiselle. The Colonel's death was poison, administered in his brandy, the waxy stain a residue, the locked room, a ruse. The hidden passage allowed entry." "Doctor," Crane, researching the manor, found the passage and the step's secret and was silenced with poisoned wine. The sapphire, stolen from the safe, was the motive's heart. He turned with the agility of a cat. "Mademoiselle Henshaw, you sought the sapphire driven by debt, but you are no killer. Your shadow, your fear, it was genuine. Monsieur Tobin, your knowledge of the grounds, the clay, you knew more than you said, but you are not the mastermind." Tobin-Setz's jaw clenched, but he remained silent. Poirot-Setz's eyes fixed on Vivienne. "Mademoiselle Leroux, your shawl-Setz's thread was found on the step. Your debt to the Colonel, your wartime past, your access to the decanter. You had motive and opportunity, but you lacked the knowledge of the passage." Poirot turned to Lady Blackthorne, his voice softening. "Madame, it is you. You knew the passage, the step's compartment, from your husband's restoration. You invited the Colonel, knowing his grudge against Vivienne and Crane. You poisoned his brandy, using the passage to enter his room unseen. You killed Crane when he uncovered your family's secret, the sapphire, hidden in the step long ago, stolen again to fund your failing estate. The notes, the footprint, they were misdirection, evoking the curse to mask your crimes." Lady Blackthorne's face crumpled, her hands trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, I had no choice. The manor, my legacy, it was crumbling. The sapphire was mine by right, but Reginald threatened to expose my husband's fraud in acquiring it. Crane was too close to the truth. I used the step, the passage, to protect my family." The room was silent, the guests stunned. Henshaw sobbed. Vivienne stared in disbelief, and Tobin shook his head. Poirot continued. "The 17th step was your stage, madam. You placed the clay, opened the compartment, spilled the wine to evoke Eleanor's tragedy, to sow fear. But your mistake was the thread, caught when you checked the compartment, fearing Crane had found the sapphire." Lady Blackthorne slumped, defeated. "I only wanted to save Blackthorne Manor." Poirot-Setz's eyes softened, but his resolve was firm. "Murder, madame, is never the answer. The truth, it is always revealed." As the storm faded, the constable arrived, summoned by a servant. Lady Blackthorne was taken into custody, her confession sealing her fate. The sapphire, recovered from a hidden niche in the passage, was returned to the safe. The guests, shaken, prepared to leave, their secrets laid bare. Poirot stood alone by the 17th step, now just wood and memory. He reflected on human nature, greed, fear, betrayal, and the manor's dark history. "The little grey cells," he murmured. "They see what the heart conceals." With a final glance, he turned away, the manor settling into an uneasy peace.